Welcome back to Crimson Threads, the channel where we unravel the darkest knots of human nature. Each week, we bring you a story that will challenge everything you thought you knew about the people next door, the smiling faces you see every day. Today's story is one of the most chilling we've ever covered. It's a story about a perfect family, a pristine home, and a horrifying secret hidden in the most unlikely of places. Before we delve into the shadows, if you're new here, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss a single thread of the stories we unravel. Now, prepare yourselves as we journey into the heart of a suburban nightmare. A story titled, Daughter Kills Parents: The Horrifying Secret Hidden Beneath the Turtle Pond. The Abernathy family was the picture of suburban perfection. From the outside, their lives were a meticulously curated collection of idyllic moments. Their sprawling two-story colonial home, with its pristine white siding and wraparound porch, sat on a manicured lawn that was the envy of the neighborhood. But the crown jewel of their property was the Turtle Pond. It was a serene oasis in their backyard, a miniature ecosystem teeming with life. Lily pads floated on the surface of the dark water, and a small, decorative waterfall trickled over moss-covered rocks, creating a soothing melody that masked the silent screams of a family slowly suffocating under the weight of their own secrets. Mr. and Mrs. Abernathy, or Richard and Eleanor as they insisted on being called, were pillars of the community. Richard was a successful architect, a man who designed dreams for others while meticulously constructing a nightmare for his own family. Eleanor was the quintessential society wife, her days filled with charity luncheons and garden club meetings, her smile as carefully cultivated as the prize-winning roses that lined their walkway. And then there was their daughter, Amelia. Amelia was their masterpiece, the living embodiment of their every hope and aspiration. She was beautiful, intelligent, and talented, straight-A student, a gifted pianist, and the captain of the school's debate team. To the outside world, she was the perfect daughter, a testament to her parents' impeccable upbringing. But beneath the surface of Amelia's carefully constructed facade, a storm was brewing. Her life was a gilded cage, every moment orchestrated by her parents, every decision made for her. Her friends were handpicked, her hobbies pre-approved, and her future mapped out with the same precision Richard used to design his award-winning buildings. The pressure to be perfect was relentless, a constant, suffocating weight. Her every achievement was met not with praise, but with the expectation of more. A 98 on a calculus exam was met with the question, what happened to the other 2 points? A flawless piano recital was followed by a critique of her posture. Her parents' love was conditional, a commodity to be earned, and the price was her absolute, unwavering obedience. The first cracks in the facade began to appear subtly. It started with small acts of rebellion, a forgotten curfew, a misplaced homework assignment, a slip of the tongue that revealed a hint of the sarcasm that simmered beneath her placid exterior. Richard and Eleanor were quick to quash any sign of dissent. Her transgressions were met with swift and severe punishment. Her phone confiscated, her car keys taken away, her already limited social life curtailed even further. They were masters of psychological warfare, their weapons of choice guilt, manipulation, and a chillingly effective form of emotional blackmail. We only want what's best for you, Amelia, Eleanor would say, her voice dripping with faux sincerity. Everything we do it out of love. For a long time, Amelia believed them. She internalized their impossible standards and learned to wear the mask of the perfect daughter. But as she grew older, the gilded cage became a prison, and she was desperate to escape. Her senior year of high school was supposed to be a stepping stone to a future of her own making, but for Amelia, it was just another year in her sentence. While her classmates were celebrating their college acceptance letters, Amelia was informed that her parents had already chosen a university for her, a small, prestigious liberal arts college just a few miles from home. "We want you to be close," Richard had said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "We've already paid the deposit." That was the moment something inside Amelia snapped. The years of repressed anger and desperate yearning for freedom coalesced into a single, terrifying thought. She had to get out. And if her parents wouldn't let her go, she would have to make them disappear. The plan began to form in the darkest corners of her mind. She started with small deceptions, creating a secret email account to connect with a world her parents didn't control. She met a boy online from another state who knew nothing of her gilded cage. To him, she was not the perfect daughter, but a girl with dreams of her own. Her parents, oblivious, saw only what they wanted to see. Their masterpiece. The night it happened was an ordinary Tuesday. Richard was in his study, and Eleanor was in the living room. Amelia was in her room, supposedly studying for her final exams. But she was putting the finishing touches on her plan. Her search history was a chilling testament to her intentions. How to disable a home security system, odorless, untraceable poisons, how to soundproof a room. She had chosen a poison that would mimic the symptoms of a heart attack, raising no suspicion given her father's history of high blood pressure. She brewed 2 cups of her parents' favorite chamomile tea, her hands surprisingly steady as she added the lethal dose. "I thought you might like some tea," she said, her voice as sweet as the poison she was about to serve. Eleanor smiled, her guard down. Richard, lured out of his study, took his cup without a second thought. Amelia watched, her face a blank canvas, as the poison took hold. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply watched. When it was over, she dragged their bodies to the soundproofed basement. The next morning, the Abernathy's pristine White House stood as a silent testament to the horrors that had transpired. The mail piled up, and the newspapers lay unread. It was 3 days before a concerned neighbor called the police. When the police arrived, they found a house that was eerily perfect. There were no signs of forced entry, no signs of a struggle. Richard and Eleanor Abernathy had vanished without a trace. Amelia, when questioned, was the picture of a distraught daughter. Her performance was flawless. She told the police her parents had gone on a last-minute second honeymoon. Her story was flimsy, but with no other evidence, the police had no choice but to believe her. As the days turned into weeks, a sense of unease began to settle over the picturesque neighborhood. The Turtle Pond, once a symbol of the Abernathy's idyllic life, now seemed to hold a sinister secret in its dark, still water. And Amelia, the grieving orphan, continued to play her part, her mask of innocence firmly in place. But behind her carefully rehearsed tears, a horrifying secret lay buried, waiting to be unearthed. Detective Miles Corrigan was a man who didn't believe in perfect families. In his 20 years as a cop, he had learned that behind every white picket fence, there was a secret. The Abernathy case, with its pristine house and vanished occupants, had set off all his internal alarms. He had interviewed Amelia Abernathy on the day her parents were reported missing, and while her performance had been convincing, something about her had struck him as off. Her grief felt rehearsed, her answers a little too polished. As the investigation dragged on with no leads, he found himself circling back to the girl and the inconsistencies in her story. He started digging, re-interviewing neighbors, friends, and family. He was looking for a loose thread, something that would unravel the carefully woven tapestry of the Abernathy's perfect life. And then he found it. Amelia had told the police her parents had taken their passports for a trip to Europe, but a routine check with the State Department revealed that Richard and Eleanor Abernathy's passports had not been used in over a decade. It was the first chink in Amelia's armor. Corrigan brought her in for questioning again, this time as a person of interest. He confronted her with the information about the passports. For the first time, Amelia faltered. I must have been mistaken," she stammered. They must have had new ones." But the lie was transparent. Corrigan pressed her, his questions becoming more pointed. He asked about her relationship with her parents, about the pressure she was under. With each question, another piece of the facade crumbled. He spoke to her friends, the ones her parents hadn't handpicked. They painted a very different picture of Amelia, girl who was suffocating under her parents' expectations. A girl who had spoken of running away. He obtained a warrant to search her computer, her phone, her room. And that's when the floodgates opened. Her secret email account, her online conversations, her search history, it was all there. a digital breadcrumb trail that led him straight to her dark secret. How to make a murder look like a heart attack. The best way to dispose of a body. How deep to dig a grave. The search terms were a chilling litany of her intentions. Corrigan knew he had enough to arrest her, but he needed the bodies. He went back to the house with a forensic team. They scoured every inch of the property but found nothing. The house was almost unnaturally clean. Corrigan stood in the backyard, staring at the turtle pond. It was the only place they hadn't searched. He had a gut feeling. He called in a team of divers. The wait was agonizing. Then one of the divers surfaced, his face pale. "You're not going to believe this," he said. They had found them. Richard and Eleanor Abernathy were at the bottom of the turtle pond, their bodies wrapped in heavy-duty tarps and weighed down with concrete blocks. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community. The story of the perfect family who had vanished was now a gruesome tale of a daughter who had murdered her parents. Amelia Abernathy was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The mask of the grieving daughter was gone, replaced by a cold, defiant stare. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Her digital footprint, the testimony of her friends, the bodies in the pond. It was a web of her own making, and it was closing in around her. The trial was a media circus. The prosecution painted a picture of a cold, calculating psychopath. The defense argued that she was a victim of psychological abuse. But in the end, the jury saw only a killer. They found her guilty on all counts, and she was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. As she was led away from the courtroom, she caught a glimpse of Detective Corrigan. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met, and in that moment he saw something that chilled him to the bone. It wasn't remorse. It wasn't regret. It was a look of triumph. The unraveling thread had not only exposed a killer, it had exposed a truth that was far more disturbing. That the seeds of evil can be sown in the most unlikely of places. The years that followed were a blur of concrete and steel. Amelia's world had shrunk to the confines of an 8-by-10-foot cell. But in this new, brutal reality, she found a strange, unsettling peace. There were no expectations here, no impossible standards to meet. For the first time in her life, Amelia Abernathy was free. She became a model prisoner, just as she had been a model daughter. She followed the rules and kept to herself. The other inmates called her the Ice Queen, a name whispered in hushed tones. They saw the same chilling emptiness in her eyes that Detective Corrigan had seen. The prison psychiatrist, Dr. Evans, tried to break through her icy exterior. He spent hours with her, week after week, trying to understand what had led her to commit such a heinous act. Amelia would listen patiently, her expression a mask of polite indifference. She told him what he wanted to hear, spinning a tale of a tortured soul, a victim of circumstance. But it was all a performance. The truth was something she kept locked away. The truth was that she had felt nothing. She had felt nothing when she had poured the poison, nothing when she had watched them die, nothing when she had sunk them to the bottom of the turtle pond. She had felt only a profound sense of relief, a wave of liberating euphoria. She had not killed her parents in a fit of rage or desperation. She had killed them because they were in her way. It had been a cold, calculated decision, and she had never, not for a single moment, regretted it. Detective Corrigan, long since retired, could never quite shake the Abernathy case. It had haunted his dreams. He would sometimes drive by the old Abernathy house, now owned by a new family with young children whose laughter echoed through the rooms where so much darkness had once resided. The turtle pond was gone, replaced by a swing set and a sandbox. But for Corrigan, the ghosts of Richard and Eleanor Abernathy would forever linger. The story of the Turtle Pond killer eventually faded from the headlines, replaced by new tragedies. But for those who had been touched by the case, the echo of silence that had descended upon the Abernathy house that fateful Tuesday night would never truly fade. It was a silence that spoke of the darkness that can fester in the human heart, of the secrets that can be hidden behind a smile. And in her cell, in the quiet solitude of her self-imposed freedom, Amelia Abernathy would sometimes close her eyes and remember the turtle pond. A small, almost imperceptible smile would touch her lips a smile of triumph, a smile that was the final, chilling testament to the horrifying secret that had been hidden beneath the turtle pond. The silence that followed was not one of peace, but of a chilling finality. The ripples of her actions had finally stilled, leaving behind a placid surface that belied the stormy depths of a soul that had never truly been understood. A decade passed. The world outside moved on, but inside the gray confines of the Oak Haven Maximum Security Women's Penitentiary, time had a different texture. Amelia Abernathy, now a woman in her late 20s, was no longer the hollow-eyed teenager who had stood impassively in the courtroom. She had become a quiet, formidable presence within the prison walls, a figure both respected and feared. Her power was not born of violence or intimidation. Her weapons were far more subtle. Using her sharp intellect, Amelia had methodically navigated the complex social ecosystem of the prison. She had secured the coveted position of prison librarian, a role that granted her access to information and, by extension, influence. She knew which inmates were learning to read, which ones were studying law, which ones were writing desperate, secret-filled letters home. She offered her assistance, drafting appeals for the barely literate in exchange for loyalty, recommending books to guards studying for promotion exams in exchange for small privileges. She had turned her cage into a kingdom, and she was its silent, patient queen. Dr. Evans, the prison psychiatrist, had long since abandoned any attempt to cure Amelia. He recognized that searching for remorse in her was like trying to find warmth in a block of ice. Instead, he observed her as a scientist might study a rare and perfect predator, flawlessly adapted to its environment. The patient exhibits no guilt or remorse, he wrote in his final report before his own retirement. Instead, she displays a profound contentment with her circumstances. It appears that for her, prison is not a punishment, but the ultimate liberation from the expectations of the outside world. In the most twisted way imaginable, she has achieved her freedom. This static, controlled world was disrupted by the arrival of a letter. It was from Jenna Kovac, a young, ambitious journalist producing a true crime podcast that was rapidly gaining a cult following. The Turtle Pond killer case was the stuff of legenda suburban gothic tale that was perfect for a deep-dive reinvestigation. Jenna, however, wasn't interested in simply rehashing the gruesome details. She was convinced that the narrative of a monstrous, evil child was too simple. She wanted to understand the why. She wanted to tell the story of the girl in the gilded cage. Amelia, after a calculated period of feigned reluctance, agreed to a series of interviews. She saw not a journalist, but a new audience, a fresh mind to mold, an opportunity to control her own legacy. Jenna's first move was to track down the detective who had put Amelia away. She found Miles Corrigan living a quiet life in a small coastal town. He was older, his face etched with lines the Abernathy case had helped carve. He was wary and initially refused to speak with her. "You're not looking for a story, Ms. Kovac," he warned her over the phone, his voice gravelly. "You're looking into an abyss. And the thing about an abyss is it looks back at you. Leave it alone." But Jenna was persistent. Reluctantly, Corrigan agreed to meet her. He told her about the chilling emptiness in Amelia's eyes, the flawless performance, the complete lack of emotion. "She's not a misunderstood victim," he insisted, leaning across the small cafe table. "She's a void, a black hole in the shape of a person. Don't let her fool you. She'll tell you exactly what you want to hear." Jenna left the meeting feeling that Corrigan was a good man, but a cynical one, trapped in a simplistic, old-fashioned view of good and evil. Her first interview with Amelia took place in the sterile, sound-dampening environment of the prison visiting room. Amelia was poised, articulate, and disarmingly intelligent. She didn't offer excuses or pleas for sympathy. Instead, she spoke with a calm, detached sadness about a childhood devoid of genuine affection, a life lived as a performance piece for her parents. She painted a picture of relentless psychological pressure that was far more nuanced and insidious than anything her defense team had argued. She spoke of the Turtle Pond not as a gravesite, but as the only place she had ever felt a sliver of peace, watching the silent, unjudging creatures glide through the water. She never confessed. She never had to. She simply laid out the pieces of her life in such a way that the murder seemed not like an act of malice, but an inevitable, tragic conclusion. A desperate act of self-preservation. Jenna left the prison completely captivated. This was the story. This was the hidden truth. She listened to the recording of their interview over and over, mesmerized by the quiet cadence of Amelia's voice. She was falling under the spell of the serpent, and Corrigan's warning was nothing but a distant, fading echo. Jenna Kovacs' podcast, titled The Girl by the Pond, became a sensation. It was a masterpiece of narrative journalism, weaving Amelia's soft-spoken, compelling interviews with expert testimony on the effects of narcissistic parenting and psychological abuse. Millions of listeners were enthralled. The public narrative, once set in stone, began to shift. Amelia Abernathy was recast not as a monster, but as a tragic figure, a victim who had committed a terrible act under unimaginable duress. A Free Amelia movement, fueled by social media, began to gain traction, populated by a new generation that saw her as a symbol of rebellion against silent domestic tyranny. The podcast had real-world consequences. The family now living in the old Abernathy house was forced to deal with morbid tourists and online harassment. And for Miles Corrigan, it was a waking nightmare. He watched, horrified, as the monster he had caged was being transformed into a martyr, all through the power of a well-told story. He saw Amelia's manipulative genius at work on a grand scale and knew he couldn't let her win. Driven by a furious sense of duty, Corrigan reopened his old case files, not to reprove her guilt, but to find the truth he knew he had missed. He wasn't looking for another clue. He was looking for the origin of the void. He began digging deeper into Amelia's early childhood, long before the intense academic and social pressures had mounted. He interviewed her elementary school teachers, tracked down former nannies, and spoke to the parents of children who had been her friends decades ago. At first, he found nothing but glowing reports of a bright, polite, and quiet child. But then a single thread emerged. A former neighbor, an elderly woman now in a nursing home, remembered Amelia's experiments. She recalled finding several small animals, birds, squirrels in the woods behind their houses that had been meticulously, almost surgically, injured. She dismissed it as the morbid curiosity of a child at the time, but the memory had always unsettled her. This led Corrigan to Amelia's sealed juvenile records. He pulled strings, called in favors, and finally got a judge to unseal them. And there it was, a file from when Amelia was 10 years old. She had been caught torturing a classmate's pet cat. She hadn't been angry or lashing out. The report from the child psychologist at the time was chilling. It noted her profound lack of empathy and her clinical curiosity about the response of a living organism to pain. Her parents, Richard and Eleanor, had been horrified by the potential scandal. They'd used their influence, hired the best lawyers, and had the incident expunged and sealed, burying the first concrete evidence of the darkness within their perfect daughter. They hadn't seen it as a warning sign of a budding psychopath, but as an embarrassing imperfection to be scrubbed from the family portrait. Corrigan now held the missing piece. The abuse and pressure from her parents hadn't created the monster. They had simply given the monster a target. She didn't kill them to be free. She killed them because it was the ultimate experiment, the ultimate expression of her true nature. The story of her suffering was not a reason, but a convenient, elegant excuse. He contacted Jenna Kovacs. The Free Amelia movement collapsed overnight, replaced by a wave of revulsion. In her cell, Amelia heard the news. The guards spoke of it, and a copy of an article detailing her childhood experiments was slipped under her door. Her public image was shattered. Her carefully crafted legacy was undone. She was, once again, nothing more than the Turtle Pond killer. She sat on the edge of her cot and read the article. There was no anger, no panic, no despair. When she finished, she let the paper fall to the floor. She turned her head to look at the blank, gray wall, and for a long moment, she was perfectly still. Then, a slow, faint smile touched her lips. It was the same smile Corrigan had seen in the courtroom, the same smile she held when thinking of the pond. They had taken her story, but they couldn't take her truth. The game had been thrilling, and in the silent, unjudging kingdom of her cell, she was, and always would be, perfectly and utterly free.